to this is the fact that for about almost the last 30 years, crime in every category, including violent crime and gun crime, has been gradually declining. But in the last few years, it started to increase. And that happened partly around the pandemic period. Even though people were not out on the streets, people were home more often. There was a rise in domestic violence, a rise in economic insecurity, in fear. There have been demonstrations around the country in the last few years, and those have been hyped in a way to scare people to some degree. And we have seen, as you're suggesting, a large number of Americans going out and buying guns and increasing the total number of guns. And of course, you can't have gun violence without firearms. And we're a nation that owns a great many firearms anyway, but this recent increase in firearm circulation in the country has predictably led to the count that you just described of gun suicides, gun homicides, and then accidental deaths from guns. And we've also seen an increase in mass shootings. And as terrible as they are, it's important to point out that mass shootings represent a very small proportion of all gun deaths every year, about 1%. It's a serious problem, and there's much more that can be done. And Congress and the President did take a step to address this problem last month.
Let's take a look at the step that the Congress took. Victor, if you agree with Dr. Spitzer's laying out of the background of the context of the situation, and also about this bill, the bill expands background checks on people between ages of 18 and 21 seeking to buy a gun. It includes incentives for states to pass so-called red flag laws that allow groups to petition courts to remove weapons from people deemed a threat to themselves or others. It also expands an existing law that prevents people convicted of domestic abuse from owning a gun to include dating partners rather than just spouses or former spouses. Do you think these will significantly reduce gun violence effectively?
Well, first of all, this bill to expand background checks for gun buyers is a necessary step, but it is definitely not sufficient. At best, I'm afraid it is whitewashing the root causes of the gun violence in the United States. I think the United States really stands out not only among developed countries, but throughout the world in terms of the gun violence. And even up to today, the United States government, agencies, federal government, state governments, you name it, still refuse to address the fundamental causes of the gun violence, which has resulted in so many lives being taken away in the United States. In a sense, the worst enemy of the United States do not exist outside of the United States. They exist inside the United States.
What do you think are or is the biggest root cause?
Well, I think if we go back all the way to 1791, when the Second Amendment was enacted, we need to ask one fundamental question. At that time, who could really own a gun? It's not the African Americans. They were enslaved, and they were not American Indians. They were the enemies to be wiped out, and eventually genocide was committed to eliminate the American Indians. They probably were not even females, because the females in the United States at that time did not have guns. So you are talking about a small group of white male who own guns at that time. And they own guns for what purposes? They own guns to kill the American Indians and enslave the Afro-Americans, and then to deprive the American ladies of their political rights. This is the real root cause of the gun violence in the United States. And I'm very sorry that for more than 200 years, this origin of the gun violence in the United States has not been fully addressed. And the legacy is spreading out like wildfire, because right now, more people can own guns in the United States, and those who commit gun violence with guns, they own or they don't own, even include teenagers or even younger people. So you are talking about a country owning guns, committing violence, taking away people's lives, and you are talking about really protecting the human rights of the American people without life, or with your life to be wantonly taken away. What are the human rights you are talking about?
Brendan, I want to get your reaction on what Victor just said, addressing what he believes is the biggest root cause